This time, climate activist, former hippie, flower salesman, and politician Max Nofziger joins the Plutopia podcast. We discuss Max's political career in Austin, his environmental activism, his in-progress memoir, and much more.
You know, I led those campaigns to stop fossil fuel plants. And nobody wants to do that now. You know why? Because it's really hard. When we campaigned against the lignite plant, our opponents said, if we don't have this, people are going to freeze in the dark. Okay, scare tactic. We won anyhow. Nobody froze in the dark back then. Now they do, but back then. And then when we shut down the 4 coal plants, that was the argument again. People are going to freeze in the dark. No, they're not. There were no brownouts, there were no blackouts, nobody froze in the dark. So we shut down power plants and managed to fill that void, that gap, with solar power, energy conservation, and wind power.
So our guest tonight is Max Nofziger.
Hey, that's how you say it. Way to go,
Right
John.
on. I got it right out there, didn't I?
See, you got to do those tongue loosening exercises that all the actors do. Scoop.
Yeah. Well, you're joining us from Ohio, where you went to avoid that Austin heat. So how's that working for you?
Well, it's good. You know, I'm a climate refugee, climate change refugee. I have to leave those areas where it's so hot in the summertime and come up to cool Ohio. I've been doing that for 12 years now, actually, and I'm sure it's added years to my life to miss those Texas summers. So it's working out great.
So I thought you guys were getting a little bit of unnatural heat for your area.
Well, you know, when we do, it lasts 2 days and it's like 88, and that's for like 2 hours between 4 and 5, 5 and 6 in the afternoon. And then it's 50, and then it's 50 degrees in the morning. So
I'll rub it in. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can't help it. I'm sorry you're going through this. You know, I really am.
John and I grew up in West Texas, so we were kind of trained in it already.
Yeah, you could probably even work in it if you had to.
I did.
Yeah.
I heard this story the other day, and Scoop, I know you know this one. It was about a woman who put some bread in her mailbox so that she could bake it there.
In Houston, of course.
Yeah.
They had a picture of it, and it looked better than some of the loaves I baked in my expensive oven. So maybe I'm doing it all wrong. I have a nice mailbox out front. I have to see what I can cook up.
Well, why do you suppose it's so hot? Max, you got any theories?
Well, you know, we've been, ever since the Industrial Revolution, you remember that from your history books, not that you lived it, but for 250 years, we've been putting all this exhaust from burning things into the atmosphere. And guess what? After you do that long enough and at such an intensive rate, why the stuff gathers up there and it changes the climate. That's what happened.
You know, it's like a big lens, right? It's like when you take a magnifying glass.
It seems like we learned earlier that when you dump stuff into water, you have a problem. So we learned that maybe, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 years ago, but it took us a little longer to learn it about dumping stuff into the air. But now we're figuring it all out. Can't do that without paying the price.
So have you been practicing a bit of climate activism?
No, I did that when I was in Austin. You know, that's what I did in Austin, you know, and I'll tell you, you don't know this about me. Nobody does, but I closed 6 fossil fuel plants in Austin. 6.
I didn't even know we had 6 fossil fuel plants in Austin.
Well, no. And see,
because you closed them.
Well, that's why, right?
Yeah, I got it.
See, in 1983, you might have heard about the lignite. There was a lignite plant that was on the ballot before the voters. And I was part of a small group of hippies on bicycles, as we were called by our opponents, who campaigned against it, and we won. So we stopped the lignite plant. Then the city said, okay, if we're not going to do lignite, we need to build 4 coal plants, 500 megawatts each by the year 2002.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, that's a load of crap. We don't even need that much power. We certainly don't want coal. So I led the effort to stop the coal plants. We bought the land, $20 million worth of land out by Weberville to build these coal plants. And so that was the plan. When I got elected to the city council in 87, everybody knew that was the end of the coal plants. They were not going to advance any further. So the lignite plant, 4 coal plants, and then the Holly plant. That's when I was a council member. It caught fire again, huge billowing black smoke above East Austin. And it's like, oh, that's it for the Holly power plant. And I figured out a way to shut it down. It was built in 4 units at different times. So what we did was go, okay, that first unit is 30 some years old. That's how long the bonds were sold to pay for it. That's its active life. So we'll just let it go out instead of spending a bunch of money to refurbish it and keep it going. So we did that to the first unit. Likewise with the second, which came on a couple years later. So we just retired those units when they hit 30 years, and it's gone. It's torn down. So nobody else in Austin can claim to have shut down 6 fossil fueled power plants. And guess what? That's what all the experts say we need to do to stop climate change. And I was doing it back in 1983, 1987.
And of course, that stuff was in East Austin.
Of course.
Of course.
That's where you
Yeah.
always cite those really nasty places anywhere near a minority neighborhood. Houston's is notorious for that. I lived in one of those neighborhoods with a lot of folks who were really upset because they were getting polluted and all the rich folks were just having a nice old time at the country club.
Boy, yeah. There's a name for that these days. They call that environmental racism, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
There's a new wrongdoer out here that a lot of people out in the hill country are getting upset about, and that's the cement plants, because they have these really fine particulates that get thrown up into the air right around neighborhoods that are in downwind from these places. And they're all going, oh, no, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just old cement.
Well, and cement plants are one of the biggest emitters of climate change gases too. So that's a really bad thing. But when you're in a high growth area like Austin and Central Texas, you need a lot of cement. Look at all the cement they're gonna put in the ground for that light rail system they're gonna build. That's a lot of cement. That's a lot of climate change gases right there.
Yeah, they're starting to scale back some of those grand plans because it's becoming obvious that it's going to be hard to support them, at least financially. And that goes for the office buildings in Austin, all those grand towers they've thrown up. A lot of those are not filling up with tenants like they had planned.
Mm-hmm. Is
That seems to be a widespread problem
Yeah,
in
everywhere.
cities in general. Yeah.
Well, you could house a lot of homeless in just one of those towers, I reckon.
Mhm. And there are some people proposing that, but of course the investment bankers don't want their investment to be full of those dirty homeless folk.
Well, no, that wouldn't work.
So
So go ahead, John.
no, I was just gonna say, I wonder why they're not filling up. I know. So in San Francisco, I know they had a number of tall buildings that are pretty much vacant now because during the pandemic, people quit coming into work. They started working remotely, and it turns out that worked out okay. So they never came back, and now those office buildings are empty. But is that what happened in Austin too? I had the impression that's a little more lively in downtown Austin than it is in downtown San Francisco right now.
Yeah, there are a lot of people living there.
Yeah. But that thing about working remotely, that no doubt, that happened here in Austin to some degree because all the high-tech jobs, we found out through the pandemic that, gee, that's a thing you can do is work from home. You
Yeah.
don't have to go in the office maybe once a week just to see your compadres. So yeah, I'm sure that's a factor. I don't know. It seems like Austin will probably, the rate will grow and attract enough businesses to eventually, fill those buildings. But we might not need any more for a while till that happens.
Yeah, one would hope not. A lot of the problems, these places were over capitalized. They had all these venture capital people coming in and giving them tons of money, and now they want to get paid. And these buildings aren't making all the revenue that they had promised. So there's a lot of bankruptcies going on. We had Nate Paul. He's he's pretty much been divested of all of his, ill-gotten gains, as he owned a lot of Austin property on, what was it, the IBM, the old IBM complex. They took that
Huh.
away in bankruptcy, and I think he's pretty much, propertyless. Couldn't have been
Wow.
a nicer
Eh,
guy.
Is that the is that the guy who was mixed up with Paxton?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, what about how is the impeachment of Paxton coming along? I hadn't heard much lately.
I don't know. I think that Paxton bought himself an impeachment judge the other day. Actually,
Oh,
somebody told me that that's BS, that when I said that, but it is a fact that Paxton has a PAC, and that PAC gave a lot of money to Dan Patrick, and Dan Patrick is going to be the judge for the impeachment. It looks bad,
hmm.
but maybe it isn't.
Well, but in there a vote of the Senate? I mean, isn't that what determines? I mean,
Yeah, but
Patrick
Well,
doesn't
it's
get
true, but they're going to have a trial, and the trial is going to have a judge, and the judge is going to be Dan Patrick,
yeah,
the
which
lieutenant
he
governor,
can
right?
put his thumb on the scales, I'm sure.
yeah,
Presumably.
he's good at that because
Yeah.
it doesn't really happen in the Senate unless Uncle Dan says so.
Oh, yeah.
I don't. We really. It's not clear to me what's going on down there, and I don't think we have the whole story. It is kind of odd that the Republicans turned on one of their own to the extent that they did, because they normally don't do that. So
That's right.
Paxton has done something pretty bad to get those guys riled, and it's probably not in the court or the documents that they're sharing publicly.
Yeah. Well, the final thing was that settlement he tried to push through with his fired employees, the whistleblowers that he
Yeah.
fired. He wanted the state to pay them, 3 million plus, and that kind of irritated everyone at that point.
That's too much for even his Republican colleagues. That's
Yeah.
just too out there for that. Well, as that thing blew up and as it developed and they got as far as they did with the impeachment, I started thinking, it wouldn't have gone this far unless it was already wired up for him to be impeached. Why would they bother to go through all this and then he's not thrown out of office? I
Well, it's a
think
good point.
I
Yeah.
think it might be that it's already decided and determined, and it's just going to play out and he's going to be gone. That'd be nothing short of a miracle in Texas politics, I think.
Yeah, it cost a lot of money to the state, plus the bad reputation he brought to the state government. I mean, indictments. I mean, we've had plenty of politicians indicted, but nothing on his scale. And it's kind of hard. The Republican Party used to be a pretty conservative, business-oriented party that didn't, you know, smile about people being cheats, and even though they might cheat a little bit, but when someone really cheats big time, you can't really ignore that for too long. So I think they finally said that's enough.
Well, I hope so. The Republican Party in Texas and across the country used to have values and principles, and I think they have basically sold those out. They don't do that anymore.
Hmm.
They just go with whatever works and lines their pockets.
Well, they're fighting a culture war, and they don't really have time to like govern.
That's right.
They're
They're
busy
totally
with.
absorbed with the culture wars.
I mean, for instance, one of my senators, Ted Cruz, um, could be working on things like getting people fed and climate change. I mean, he could certainly be doing something about climate change, but There's no way that he can do that when we have Barbie trying this Barbie movie trying to indoctrinate our kids. You know, this Chinese communist propaganda that's
Oh
all
no.
pink. I mean, there's a reason it's pink.
Pinkos.
Yeah, we all know about those pinkos there.
Yeah, they are. Barbie. Oh gosh, we
But
should
that's
have seen
kind
it coming.
that's the real problem. The problem is that they've all just stopped working. They're not doing anything for anybody. All they're doing is playing these culture games and posting to social media, and I don't know, showing nude pictures of Hunter Biden, and they're not taking care of business.
Well, so many of the, I think, senators and in the House of Representatives, they've become talking heads to be interviewed. They become pundits. They're interviewed. They're critical of Biden. They're critical of anybody that's trying to get anything done policy wise, and they view that as their job. They've abandoned their job as policymakers, as lawmakers, as trying to help the American public. They just don't do that anymore. They're
And the
talking
question is,
heads.
why are they doing that? Why? What's in it for them? What is the thing that they're trying to achieve?
Well, it's easier than governing, for one thing, just to, talk to a camera or talk to a reporter. You don't have to do that much. And it satisfies their base. It's a chance for them to feed red meat to their base. And that's the main thing they're doing.
Yep.
And why is their base buying this shit? Why? I can't imagine why. I can't imagine why Donald Trump has any kind of following at all, let alone half of this tiny Republican Party. I mean, it's not that many people, but it's, he thinks it's a lot because it's a 50% of Republicans. So it's like 50% of 25% of the people in the US say that they'll vote for Donald Trump or that they support him. That's really not a lot of people. That's, what is that, 12.5%?
Well, it's enough to, keep them all afloat politically for right now. But, Abbott's the one that's, really doing the talking up with his border policies, which have been in the news this week with, it's really bad publicity because of talking about how they had been ordering the Texas National Guard and the DPS officers down there to throw the migrants back into the Rio Grande River and to not try to save them. And they had they had a couple of DPS officers who actually certified that they saw those very things being done, and they tried to complain to their higher ups, and the higher ups was like, "Well, Abbott told us, so we're just going to do it."
Wow. That's really inhumane, I think.
Yeah,
There's
beyond.
got to be a better way than that. Holy cow.
Well, if you treat people well, if you give them water and you kind of help them stay afloat, that sort of thing, then they'll just keep coming. They'll just keep coming across the border. So what you have to do is treat them with utmost cruelty, and that's the way you get them to stop coming.
Well, they're going to stop coming from inside the United States also, because there have been a lot of really negative polls lately about Texas not being a great, unless you're wealthy, it's not a great place to come to and settle and raise your kids and have babies and or not have babies. And it's just ridiculous that people used to kind of look up to Texas as being, crazy perhaps, but not really evil. But now, I mean, they've become the new evil empire. Darth Abbott has taken over the.
Well, cruelty, I think, is now part of the Republican playbook. Trump is cruel. He delights in bullying people, and I think he delights in being cruel. And now all his acolytes see that, oh, that's how we're supposed to do that. So people like Abbott are eager to jump in on that bandwagon. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Who would have known there's so many fools in the world? I didn't.
Well, I encountered a lot of growing up in Texas, and especially in West Texas. There were a lot of kids who they loved to torture animals and burn ants with their magnifying glass, and bully people. I mean, and they ended up being titans of industry.
Or legislators.
Or legislators, yeah.
Yeah. So we should pivot here. Max, I think you told us when you visited us before, toward the end, I believe you said that you would come back and talk a little bit about your history.
Oh yeah.
Are you up for that? I would like to know how you found yourself in Austin, because I know you weren't originally from Texas, right?
Yeah,
No,
explain yourself.
I'm back home in Ohio. In fact, I'm sitting in the very house where I spent my first 20 years. So
Oh,
I'm
wow.
quite back home here. But how I came to Texas is a story. First, I drove there in my Volkswagen van with a buddy. In 1972, we went down and lived in Houston, the Montrose area of Houston, for several months. That was my first visit to Texas. And Montrose blew my mind. In the early 70s, you can imagine this farm kid saw things I'd never seen on the farm down in Montrose. So that was quite a mind expanding experience. The next year, 73, I hitchhiked from Ohio down to Houston to visit friends that I'd made that previous year. And from there, I was hitching out to California. So it took me all day, literally, to get from Houston to Columbus down on I-10. The worst hitchhiking day of my whole life. And, people were driving by, giving me the finger, throwing beer cans at me, a lot of hostility out there. And man, I was ready to get the hell out of Texas. But some guy stopped. It was late in the day. And well, this guy stopped, and I thought he was going to pick me up, but he let out a hitchhiker that he'd picked up. And this was a long-haired hitchhiker like me. And I go, oh, great, now I got competition. I was in a really foul mood. And anyhow, that long-haired guy and I started talking, and he said, well, you're obviously not getting anywhere. You can come stay with me at my place in Austin. So I had to be taken by the hand and led to Austin. And that first night, well, he lived right over by where Swedish Hill is, in those apartments just north of Swedish Hill. They're still there. And the first night, after we got cleaned up, we walked over that ridge to Mother Earth, which was there on Lamar, and Too Smooth was playing. So, and the dance floor, if you remember, was lit up. It was squares, different colored squares that lit up from underneath. That was pretty cool. I'd never seen that before. So, and then we walked across the bridge to the split rail in South Austin. And so it's like that was my introduction to Austin. The next day, we got a 6-pack of beer and went out on Barton Creek. Like the song said, Lone Star sipping and skinny dipping. Michael Martin Murphy song, popular back then. And that was it for me, out there sitting in the sun, soaking up the beauty. It was like, this is my place. So I stayed a few days, never did make it out to California. I went to Ohio and moved down the next year. So I came to Texas in 72, passed through Austin, and it was July the 5th. It was the day after Willie's first picnic. So the whole town was aglow with music and Willie Afterglow. So that was quite an atmosphere. And then I moved down just a few months after I visited for the first time, and the rest is my history. Been here since 74.
Well, I'm glad you did at least a little bit of time in the Montrose. I was probably your neighbor because in 72, I was working at Pacifica Radio at KPFT, and I lived right there in the middle of the Montrose. We'd go up to Anderson Fair and have soft tacos and Shiner beer, and that was good times.
Oh man, I loved it. We were just down the street from Pacifica, and the funny thing about me landing in Texas, I read Time magazine and Newsweek back in those days, and there had been a couple stories in those magazines about Pacifica getting firebombed by the rednecks.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, I crossed Texas off my list. I don't need to go there. There's out and out violence against hippies. I was a hippie. So I don't need to go there. The funny thing is the universe landed me just a few blocks from Pacifica radio station.
Yeah, the Montrose though was a different world. It's really different now. I went back for a Pacifica Radio uh, a reunion 10 years ago or so, and I went to my old neighborhood and it was gone. It was all condos, and it's like, oh God, well, at least I saw it when it was cool.
Yeah, I went back, it was probably almost 10 years ago, and found the old house that I used to live in with a hippie family. It was still there, amazingly enough. It was right up off Albany. I don't know if you know where Albany was, kind of Tuam, you know where
Mhm.
Tuam,
Okay.
Tuam,
Yes.
and Fairview, they all kind of come together back in there. That was my neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is Anderson Fair is still there. I'd go and
Yeah.
I'd see my friend Don Sanders in there playing his folky best, and that was just a lot of fun place to go.
Hmm. What was that one? There was a nightclub up on, I don't know what floor, the eighth or 10th floor of some tall building right there. Might have been on Montrose. And you could see from the street below, you could see the lights flashing up there.
I
That
must
was,
have missed that one. That doesn't sound like hippie friendly territory.
maybe it wasn't. Well, you were probably more a folky aficionado.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was that newspaper, that underground newspaper that was down the street on Fairview.
Space City,
That was it,
Thorn
Space
Dryer.
City.
I also wrote for Space City, so I had a lot of fun there. But I disappeared from Houston in '73 to go to Berkeley, so
Oh, you got even more far out.
literally.
Are you a Houston native?
No, I grew up in Big Spring with John out in West Texas.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Scoop and I are from the same little town.
Did
Oh,
you know each other back there?
oh,
Yeah,
yes.
Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
Everybody knew everybody, I
Oh
think.
my gosh.
There weren't a
When
lot of anybody's anyway, so you couldn't help but know everybody in town.
did you all stay in touch over the years, or did you just find yourselves that you knew each other at some point here in Austin?
Well, actually, we didn't stay in touch, but quite a few years ago when I became, kind of an internet savant or whatever, and was spending all kinds of time online, one of the things I started trying to do at one point was track down some of the people I'd gone to school with. And I went to high school in Big Spring through my junior year, and then I moved to Odessa. But most of the people I knew I knew Big Spring people pretty well. And I started looking for some site, that might have information about Big Spring High School, about people who'd gone to school there. And I found this site that had been set up by this guy named Scoop Sweeney.
What a guy.
And then I figured out that he was the same guy that I knew as Chip Sweeney.
Oh, he changed his nickname.
Yeah, with a
But he was
nickname
out
like
in
that.
he was out in the Bay Area, and we didn't really get in touch at that point. But that's how I found out that Scoop had become Scoop and was out there. And then when he moved back to Texas in, what was that, Scoop, 2009?
2006, I moved back. I was working remotely for a big computer project, and so I got to work from home. And so I'm out in the wilds of Bastrop County now. But
Yeah, so at some point we connected with each other through probably Facebook, right?
exactly, Facebook.
Yeah.
You, you saw my resume and said, "Hey, boy, come join us." And then it's been
And
downhill
No
from
kidding.
there.
it turned out that we were better aligned than I ever could have imagined. There was a lot of similarity in our interests and in some of our pursuits, and we just started doing stuff together.
Yeah, it turned out, yeah, John and I were, raised real well, but somewhere it just kind of took a left turn, and went that way, but we went in the same direction.
Yeah,
Old
that happened.
hippies, yeah.
That happened to me too. I was raised right, but took I can specify. I know what happened to me. I'm telling the story. I finally got an editor to help me with my memoir. So I'm reliving the past, and she asked me because I posted this picture on Facebook the other day of my folk trio in college, where I'm real clean cut. We look like the Kingston Trio.
Oh, that's
So
funny.
she said, "Tell me how this clean cut folk singer went from that to being a hippie political activist." So I've been mucking through my past to identify those moments and how that happened. So,
Yeah.
yeah, you'll have to buy my book when it comes out.
Well, I'd love to hear your.
And interview you too.
Well, you can interview me when it comes out. How about that? You can be part of the
Yeah,
media blitz.
absolutely.
Yep. I'd
Yeah.
like to hear your folk music. Yeah. There was another folkie who went that way. That was Lou Gottlieb of the Limelighters in San Francisco. He ended up being the hippie guru in Marin County.
Oh, no kidding. Limelighters. Wow, Steve Brooks, isn't he a limelighter right now? You know Steve Brooks, he's an Austin guy.
Mhm.
I think he is one of the
Yeah.
limelighters right now.
Yeah, the
Oh, huh.
originals are all deceased, I think.
Yeah, I think
Ma-
so. You guys coming together and working together now after knowing each other. I told you that story about when I lived in Houston the first time. I met some folks, and one of them has stayed my best Texas friend all through these years. And we used to have coffee together every morning. We used to play music together in a jam. He and I started a jam in Austin, the Bakery Jam. It's still going on. We just celebrated our 18th birthday. So he and I have known each other for more than 50 years and drink coffee together every day and play music together now when I'm in Texas.
Oh,
So
that's great.
yeah, it's pretty cool to have old friends come around again like that, 50-year-old friends. I like them.
Well, we're definitely old friends. Somebody hit me in the head with the old stick, and it definitely took.
Yeah, when did that happen?
It's been a while. My memory fails me.
When Scoop and I connected, had just got involved in this Plutopia thing, which was originally going to be like a events production company, and we were going to do like cool, like futuristic events, and we did that. We did one every year at South by Southwest for several years, and Scoop started helping with that. And this particular podcast was created as an adjunct to the Plutopia event that we had every year. And the idea we initially had was that we would interview some of the people who were going to be performing at the event, and that would be part of the podcast. Then we started interviewing other people.
Yeah, we
And we
started
did that
as
for a
pimps.
while.
So we were definitely pimping for Plutopia.
Yeah. But then after that, like Plutopia sort of went away. It didn't really work as a production company, and everybody sort of scattered to the wind. And then a few years later, we started talking about reviving the podcast, and we couldn't think what to call it. I was really stuck on that. It's really crazy. I was stuck for months, maybe a couple of years on that. And then it's like, well, why don't we just start calling it the Plutopia podcast again?
Yeah, I did some searches to see if anyone had actually claimed the name. I don't think anybody wanted it. So it's like, hey, it's out there. We've had it before. We can just revive it,
Wow.
we'll dust off the corpse and bring it back to life.
What does it mean?
Well, it's actually it's a portmanteau of pluralist and utopias. The idea of pluralist utopias, and that the origin of it was in a conversation we had after the first sort of like test the waters event that we did was at Maker Faire here in Austin, the first Maker Faire that they had here, which Make Magazine brought in from outside Austin. But they invited people to do installations or demonstrations or whatever. So we proposed an installation called the DIY House of the Future. And in discussing it afterwards, I was kind of talking about how, we had really tried to show how everybody in the future supposedly would be able to sort of create their own reality, and that houses would be configurable, and that you could, bend and shape your house to be exactly what you wanted it to be. And I can't remember whether I used the term or somebody else, but that's when somebody mentioned pluralist utopias. And then somebody else, who I think was David Demaris, said, well, you should just call it Plutopia. And there we were.
How about that? Good origin story.
Yeah, what we should really be about is talking to people about how they create their own reality. And
like
I know
we're
you
doing with you. You
Yeah.
talk about, we digressed a little bit, but, Max, you had a lot of political activity here. Tell us some of the dirt. Come on, you're trying to you're trying to get your memoirs going. Certainly, there's some funny stories, dirty stories,
Tell us the bad stuff.
You want to know
interesting
where the
political
the
activity.
bodies are buried?
Oh,
Exactly,
absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah,
Hey,
you guys.
I have a shovel.
You'll have to buy the book to find out where the bodies are buried. But I this Plutopia thing, making your own reality, I kind of did that in how I went about my politics. I came out of totally left field. I didn't have any organization behind me. I wasn't anointed by anyone. Nobody drafted me to run. And I did it without spending a lot of money. And I had to beat two Goliaths. This is a classic underdog story. David and Goliath. I had to beat two Goliaths. The developers in '87 ran Gilbert Martinez. He was well funded. He had been a planning commissioner, and I I beat him. But first, I beat Sam Griswold, who was the Democratic Party candidate. So I knocked Sam out, and then it was just Gilbert and I in the runoff. And the funny thing about that situation was that George Humphrey and Sally Shipman, their races both went into runoffs as well. So it was George, Sally, and I against three developers candidates. So the developers, bless their hearts, looked at my race and went, man, if this guy can't beat a hippie flower salesman, uh, so we're not going to give him any more money. They didn't give Gilbert any more money for the runoff.
You
They
scared them away.
they put all their money into defeating George and Sally.
Well, just to be clear, you were a hippie flower salesman, but my recollection is you were a hippie flower salesman with a political science degree. Isn't that right?
Well, I did have that. Yes, I did have that. And by the time I got elected in '87, I that was my fifth campaign. So I had a lot of experience campaigning. I knew the issues from A to Z. And I was probably, I think I can say this, I was probably the most well prepared candidate to ever become a city council member because I'd been through all the hoops. But anyhow, so the climax to that funny story was that the developers were going for a clean sweep. Gilbert can beat this hippie flower salesman. We're going to fund Sally and George's opponents and knock them out. And we're going to get three people on the council. Well, guess what? They didn't get any. All my crazy hippie friends turned out big time to put me in. They knew this was the moment that had been building for 9 years. So my people turned out, and of course they voted for George and Sally while they were there voting for me. So it was a huge setback for the developers. And it was because they took me lightly. They shouldn't have done that.
So I want to ask you, it used to be that everybody on the city council was kind of elected at large, and a lot of the city council people came from West Austin, and it was, you know, it didn't feel completely democratic. And then at some point, we changed to this 10-1 thing where you have 10 city council members from different districts around town, and they're elected in their districts. Do you think that did that improve things? Are things better now because of that?
I don't think so, and I had high hopes that it would. I had hopes that it would take some of the big money out of local politics. I'm not sure that it did that, but I don't like the fact now that it's balkanized. It's you have your district, that's your main concern. I think people tend to lose sight of the city at large, and I think that's a loss for the whole community. I don't think most council members tend to take the larger view, but more focus on their base, which they have to do in terms of getting reelected. So it makes sense for them to do that. But I don't see any big advantage after we've had this system now for 10 years or so that's worked out well. But the problem that it was trying to address, you mentioned, John, the concentration of council members from West Austin.
Yeah.
When I got elected in 87, I was the only council member from south of the river. Now that's just a huge imbalance. And so, I think, and I supported single member districts. I thought, it'll take care of the imbalance. It might reduce money in politics, but I'm not sure. I don't think it's worked out very well, as far as I can see from a distance.
Yeah,
I'm not getting involved anymore.
from what I've seen, or heard, the old setup of all the West Austin people being in charge, it was basically a NIMBY thing, not in my backyard. They were defending basically West Austin against the rest of the city. And now that's all happened with the balkanization, as you said. Uh, Now all these little not in my backyard groups have sprung up. So once again, no one's really looking for Austin as a whole.
Yeah, you guys, talk back to climate change for a second. Do you know that there is a movement to close the city's coal-fired plant, the Fayette plant? There is a group that's been working on that, concerned about that. Do you know anything about it? Have you heard anything in the news about it, or any council members talking about closing the Fayette plant?
I haven't heard anything about it.
Yeah, I've heard a little, but it's basically kind of on hold because of the various power-related disasters we've had recently. But
Hmm.
we definitely, I'm in Bastrop County, and we definitely would like to get rid of that thing because when the wind changes, we get all of that pollution.
Uh-huh. Well, that's see, if anybody on the council was concerned about climate change, that's the thing you have to do. You have to get rid of your fossil fuel plants. That's what I did as early as 1983 when I ran for mayor against Kirk Watson in 1997. I campaigned on we got to close Fayette. When I campaigned in 2003 for mayor, I said we got to close Fayette. When I ran for city council in 2011, I said, we got to close Fayette. Nobody's closed Fayette.
Yeah, I was
Nobody
always
cares.
surprised that we
They don't
didn't
care.
withdraw from that.
Climate change is the biggest issue of our age, and nobody on the city council cares.
Well,
That
but
blows my mind.
that gets to the real problem in addressing climate change, which is you can get people to pay lip service to it, and they may buy a Prius or something like that, but really it's going to be hard to get people to make the changes they would really need to make, or accept
Yeah.
the changes that we would really need to make in order to truly address the burn, you
Oh,
know?
yeah.
And it's just hard to get buy-in for that. We have to give up a lot of shit, I mean, we can't, what we're doing is not sustainable, but uh, even though people may acknowledge that, and even though they may say they're going to do this or that about it, most of what people do are, kind of small acts that don't put too much of a chunk in the problem, chink in the
Well,
problem.
you have to have leaders, council members in this case, who are committed to doing that. That's what I did when before I was a council member, beginning in '83, and then when I was a council member. I thought that was a huge critical issue. And, I led those campaigns to stop fossil fuel plants. And nobody wants to do that now. You know why? Because it's really hard.
Yeah, yeah,
When we campaigned against the lignite plant, our opponents said, if we don't have this, people are going to freeze in the dark. Okay, scare tactic.
Mhm.
We won anyhow. Nobody froze in the dark back then. Now they do, but
Yeah,
back then. And then when we shut down the 4 coal plants, that was the argument again. People are going to freeze in the dark. No, they're not. Nobody. There were no brownouts. There were no blackouts. Nobody froze in the dark. So we shut down power plants and managed to fill that void, that gap, with solar power, energy conservation, and wind power.
yeah. Well, we had the snowpocalypse and the ice storm just recently, and that kind of put a lot of pressure on the power industry to slow down all that cleaning up because they they were getting killed because people were getting killed from not having power, and but the reason they weren't having enough power, it was because of the gas plants.
Yes, it was.
It wasn't coal, but it
Yeah.
was another fossil fuel, and that's they got a lot of money directed to all those gas powered power plants, and so those aren't going to go away because they've got all the politicians saying, "Oh, we'll be killing people again, so we got to make those gas plants winterized."
Yeah, snowpocalypse was the pretext for the oil and gas industry and their politicians, their political friends, to say we can't have solar and wind power. We need gas plants. And so that was a huge setback for the whole change to renewable power. And, we don't have time. We don't have time for another generation, another 30 years of fossil fuel plants. I mean, it's just not going to work. And did you see this quote the other day? Some environmental scientist said, yeah, it's hot, speaking of Texas, but this may be the coolest summer of the rest of your life.
That,
Had you
that's
heard that?
well, I've kind of experienced it from, I'm a big weather geek. I like to watch all these weather, reports from all around the world. And it's not just in the desert Southwest anymore that's getting all, you know,
Yeah.
horrendous heat. It's everywhere. It's Europe, it's, you know, even in Asia, everybody is getting cooked, and
Yeah.
the fish are getting cooked because the waters are more. There's more heat in the Gulf and in the Atlantic, the Southern Atlantic, than they've ever had.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
yeah. I was
that's
pretty
scary.
deeply into the climate change and sustainability discussions for a long time, and especially here in Austin, plugged into people who were talking about clean energy and talking about sustainability and trying to get some kind of traction. It really wasn't working that well. We had Bill McKibben come to town and give a talk. Um, I mean, we knew what was happening. We never guessed that it was going to happen as quickly as it has, though.
That's the thing.
And
A lot of politicians in Austin, but elsewhere too, took comfort in that. Oh, okay, well, like 10 or 20 years ago, they were saying, yeah, this is happening, but it's not going to happen for 20 years or 30 years. And a lot of politicians uh, took that to heart and said, and didn't do anything about it. And what's that? I'll be gone, you'll be gone.
Hmm.
I'll be gone, you'll be gone. So we don't have to worry about it because by then I'll be gone, you'll be gone, and so it'll be somebody else's
yeah,
problem.
let our grandchildren deal with it.
Yeah, I was
Exactly.
I, I was tempted to take that whole approach. I mean, hell, I'm 77 years old, and I could say, well, 20 years from now, I'll be worm food. So, I mean, let my grandkids work with it. And it's done. Then I think, Well, I like those kids. I don't want to have them living in this kind of thing. So it's
Re-
worth fighting for.
Yeah, you don't want to do that to your grandkids. I'm sure you love your grandkids. Everybody does. But it's amazing how we won't make changes in our lifestyle so that they'll have a better life. I feel for the younger generation coming into this world and what they're gonna inherit. Hey, let me ask you one question. John, you mentioned, working with South by in your early tech days. Did you know Dewey Nolan?
Dewey Nolan.
Dewey Nolan, he's passed away many years ago, but he worked with South by early on in their high tech thing, their high tech spinoff.
Well,
You didn't encounter
yeah,
Dewey?
I knew Dewey Winburn.
That was him.
Yeah,
That
Dewey
was him.
Winburn. Yeah,
I
I
got
knew him.
I got his last name wrong.
Yeah,
That was
I knew him. I hung out with him some. I stumbled into that whole thing. I had kind of not got involved with South by Southwest initially when it was just a music festival. But when we heard that they were doing something with technology, I think what we did, so I was part of a company called Fringeware back then. And Fringeware heard about this multimedia festival that they were going to do as part of South by Southwest. And that's what they call it, multimedia. And what it was, so I went down there and we asked for press passes, and Hugh Forrest knew who we were and made sure we got the press passes, and we hung out at this multimedia festival. But what it was a bunch of guys with CD-ROMs. The internet was not enough of a thing by then that it was even included. And Dewey was a guy who, my understanding is that he was a guy who created and published CD-ROMs, and he was pretty committed to like technology for social good, So he was a good guy. And he came up with this idea of doing a multimedia piece for the festival. And because he had been working on CD-ROMs, that was kind of the focus that they had there. And I got involved at that point and have stayed involved pretty much ever since.
really.
And I can tell you, it took 3 or 4 years for them to decide. I mean, I kept telling them, I said, you really ought to have something about the internet, some programming about the internet. This may amount to something,
Yeah.
And Hugh got it, and he knew, and he advocated for it, and eventually they started bringing in internet content and changed to South by Southwest Interactive. So that's kind of the history of that. But Dewey is the guy who dreamed the whole thing up. I mean, he was the instigator initially, working with Hugh. And they have a Dewey Winburn Award now that they give every year for, it's about technology for social good.
That is so cool. I'm so pleased to know that, because he used to come see me, as a council member, and he'd come see me, and we'd have an appointment, and he'd tell me what he's doing. I didn't understand any of it. I didn't really understand what he did, but he was just such a nice, affable guy, and just, smiles and laughing. I just really enjoyed being around him, and was really, it was stunning that he passed away so young.
Yeah.
But so you mentioned Hugh Forrest. I knew way back when he had a newspaper, the Challenger.
The Challenger, yeah, absolutely. I read the Challenger too.
I wrote some pieces for it. That was the start of my literary career. Well, one of the starts was writing for Hugh when he had the Challenger.
I'll never forget. This may be when I got my first copy of the Challenger. I was at You Scream Ice Cream. You remember You Scream Ice Cream?
Oh, yes.
And we were like buying some ice cream, and there was a copy of the Challenger there, and I picked it up, and I was talking to the girl who was selling me the ice cream. She said, "Yeah, that's my boyfriend." He'll probably be horrified if he hears this. That's my boyfriend, and I got the Challenger and I liked it. I noticed I kind of followed it, and then I saw that Hugh went to the Chronicle and started writing for the Chronicle. And somewhere along the line, he got pulled into the South by Southwest vortex, and he and I have been really good friends for years, and certainly, gee, I don't know what South by Southwest would be without Hugh and his efforts. I think that he is responsible for most of the programming now, or I guess maybe it's just on the interactive side, but he
got pulled into it pretty early too, didn't he? I mean,
yeah, and he's been a prime mover ever since.
He's been doing that, whatever it is he does there.
Yeah, it's a shame there's not more people in technology these days working for social good. A lot of it seems to be working for becoming a billionaire and screwing over the rest of us. And
well, now Elon Musk is trying to save Twitter.
Oh, well, bless his heart.
Hey, is Elon making flying electric cars?
No, but he will probably try.
He probably thinks they're flying.
He's like the guy who should do that. I saw somebody else got a patent or something for one, but I thought, well, that's Elon's wheelhouse.
Yeah, well, when you get back to Austin, he's here. We'll get a meeting with him, and we'll just suggest it.
Let's call a meeting with Elon. Yeah.
Can you call his secretary up? I don't have her number.
I'll just send him a DM on Twitter.
Yeah, and you'll get back the media response, the poop emoji.
Yeah. Hey, see, you tech guys, I'm sure you have your ways of communication that none of us other people, normal people, know about. So you can back channel him, John.
Maybe.
Well, he ignores people like us, especially on the internet. I think I have some passenger pigeons I could probably train to go and search him out with messages, but I don't think he's going to be reading our emails.
Hey, you got me intrigued. I'm wondering if I'm sure I probably have connections that are also connected to him.
Well,
and I have a way to I may have a way to find out. Well, maybe not. I don't know. That Elon Musk has an account on LinkedIn? No, he doesn't anymore, I guess. I bet he did at one time or another.
Just tell him to do flying electric cars, please.
Well, a Japanese company actually has one that's been approved in Japan for taxi service, and it's a flying taxi and automobile.
See, Elon could redeem himself, and that's the socially useful, technology that he could give the world.
Well, if we can create a flying electric car that also minimizes pollution, but there's like hidden costs there. I mean, the batteries, batteries are they're not without their dark side where pollution.
There's still no free lunch, Yeah. There's no free lunch. It doesn't matter what we're talking about.
Think for a second, though, the drivers that you see on the freeways and the streets of Texas, do you really want those yahoos in big flying vehicles buzzing above your head? It's like, no.
Well, they're flying around right now in their 150s and their giant big ass trucks. So I don't know.
That's dangerous enough.
It is dangerous.
I think we should just all get bicycles. That's it.
Electric bicycles.
I don't know. In order to create, to mitigate climate change and create a future for humanity, we probably need to quit doing things like that. We probably need to not try to travel as far as we do and as much as we do. And I don't know. I'm sitting in a house right now that's comfortably cool. It probably shouldn't be. It probably should be a little bit hot, And I know that there's people who run their air conditioners at 68 degrees.
That's right.
And the amount of energy that we're churning through, and it all has a cost, and the cost is cost to the earth. We have to exploit the earth in order to get this constant stream of power. I mean, look at what we're doing. We're using electricity to communicate with each other, and a whole lot of people are doing that, and it's a pretty big draw. And people are talking about doing things like virtual
Bitcoin.
reality and Bitcoin and all the various things that will just suck more and more energy. And it's like you're sucking the blood of the earth.
There you go.
You know,
Energy vampires.
if you reduce the temperature of my AC, the ice cubes in my drink are going to melt. And I mean, I'm an American. I'm sorry. I have to draw the line there.
You can't
We
go there. You
we
can't.
have reached the end of our hour, and it's
Now
been
what
great.
happened?
Well, we're done.
We have to go to bed?
We will stop. We can go to bed. We can go
Okay.
have dinner. But I hope you come back. This has been so much fun.
It was fun again. Thanks for having me back. Nice to see you, Scoop.
Thanks,
See you, John.
Max.
Okay, we'll see you. Bye-bye, everybody.
You can stay in touch with Plutopia at plutopia.io. On Facebook, look for @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.